Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Soaring Through Adversity podcast, brought to you by the Victory Advantage, a private, nonprofit foundation dedicated to empowering individuals with cognitive and physical disabilities to live independently with dignity and respect. I'm Renee Breazeale, your co founder and CEO of TVA, and your host. Through candid conversations and inspiring interviews, we'll uncover the abilities within every disability. Our goal is to challenge perspectives, foster inclusion, and celebrate resilience. Join us as we redefine what's possible, one story at a time. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're shining a light on a condition rarely discussed and to build awareness for an adversity that affects many. We'll explore how organizations like the Victory Advantage work to provide help and encouragement for those experiencing and overcoming adversity. My first guest today is Eva Potts. She is from a small town called Spring Lake near Fayetteville. Being a military brat, as she calls it, she moved around a lot before settling in Union County in 2011. She is married with three bonus children and six grands. This lady gives nonstop to her community, using her outgoing personality and passion. With a background in psychology, she displays strong communication and negotiating skills, leading to her being in the real estate market. And if that isn't enough, Eva was a social worker for over 20 years, working for the state of North Carolina as the director of the Children's Center for Easter Seals, UCP, and is now the co founder and president of the Mary Carmel Light Foundation. Now let's turn to my second guest, Kevin Potts. Kevin was raised in North Carolina and grew up in a large family. He has spent his career in the music and entertainment business. He lived in 6 states and worked over every continent. Eventually, his path led him to work in artist management and various entertainment media endeavors. However, he chose to pause his career to support his sister, Eva Potts, in raising awareness about Charles Bonnet Syndrome as co founder of the Mary Carmel Light Foundation. Well, are you guys ready to dive in?
Sure. Let's do it.
Yes.
Well, today's episode is entitled Seeing the Unseen. Welcome, Eva and Kevin.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, Eva, let's start with you. Tell us what the Mary Carmel Light Foundation does.
Well, we are a 501c3 nonprofit here in North Carolina, and we empower people living with Charles Bonnet Syndrome.
As with our foundation, our why came from a personal circumstance. Why did y'all feel led to begin a foundation shining a light on Charles Bonnet Syndrome?
Well, of course, our mother was the inspiration. She's Mary Carmel. And the light that shines down on Charles Bonnet Syndrome, we feel has worked through her. She was our inspiration. She suffered with Charles Bonnet Syndrome for a very long time. And we were left pretty much abandoned by the medical community when we first discovered what it was she was experiencing. She was abandoned by it more than we were. She was erroneously diagnosed with dementia. And when we finally understood what she was absolutely dealing with, which was Charles Bonnet syndrome, we struggled to find resources. And when we finally did, it helped us to understand it a little bit more, but we didn't have enough experience with it before we lost her in 2020. And so the need to keep going, to keep helping people that were living with this and their family members who were trying to help them live with this and maintain their quality of life, we just decided we had to keep going even though mom wasn't here anymore.
Well, I have to ask this question because we've talked about Charles Bonnet syndrome several times, and I'm sure the audience is now wondering what is Charles Bonnet syndrome. And as you've talked about with your mom suffering from it, yeah, it's something to contend with.
Absolutely. It is a physiological condition that affects people who have lost a significant amount of visual acuity or have lost their vision after being sighted. They begin to have silent visual hallucinations that are not tactile or auditory. And they can be complex or they can be simple. So, our mother unfortunately suffered from the complex, more nightmarish type of hallucinations. Although I must warn you that people who live with Charles Bonnet don't like the word hallucination, they like the word episodes, visions, because the word hallucination gives that connotation of mental illness.
Mm.
And unfortunately, people who live with Charles Bonnet syndrome are often misdiagnosed with either dementia, schizophrenia, severe bipolar disorder, Lewy body dementia, or mania, or psychosis. And all they're suffering from is low vision. There's been an impact to their vision, and it comes on suddenly. There's no warning. There are no symptoms that develop before you get this other than your visual acuity dropping. When they come on quickly like that, the person who's experiencing it becomes confused and anxious and fearful, of course, because why wouldn't you? This is something out of the blue that's happened to you, and your caregiver is wondering what to do to help you. And a doctor may say, you have Charles Bonnet syndrome, and then they'll say, well, good luck, because we don't know anything about it. And some doctors are now at least Googling it, finding us, finding Esme's Umbrella in the UK, and then directing them to those resources. And we help them from there with our support groups, our helpline, and that type of thing.
That sounds amazing, but I have to ask a question. And Kevin, you take this as caregivers and your mom's children. How did watching her go through this make you feel?
Helpless most of the time when we really didn't know what it was. It was mostly just a helpless feeling. And then when we knew what it was, there was a little bit less helplessness feeling. We at least knew what it was. We created mantras or these, repetitive phrases like, what you're seeing, mom, is not real. It's Charles Bonnet putting those visions in your eyes. The brain is essentially starved of visual input because it's not getting the same input anymore. And for many people, it puts those images in the eyes for you when it is starved of imagery. Moms were generally very negative and dark. Sometimes they were a little bit reminiscent and joyful for her, but even those were wrought with confusion about why she was seeing these things. And so mostly helplessness, but as we moved along, it was less helplessness and more frustration over how do we make this better. But as Eva has referred to, the doctors in mom's circle and even outside of mom's circle were not equipped for it. Even if they wanted to be and they wanted to help, they couldn't. And some of the best help we got wasn't anything physical or medicinal or anything like that. It was simply a neuro ophthalmologist confirming to our mother that she had Charles Bonnet syndrome. That was maybe the biggest thing that happened in the process for us that was the most helpful. Everything else was developing new coping mechanisms, playing music for her, recording her talking about what she was going through, and then replaying it for her while she was having an episode or a hallucination to help draw her back and realize what her own voice had said. Changing light. There was just so many things that we learned about. Very late, we learned about the coping mechanisms, but were already trying a lot of our own. Music was probably the best distractor on a regular basis, but sometimes mom's episodes could go on for days. Playing a constant game of it's not real, and trying all these different coping mechanisms in different sequences to try to get it to stop, ground her, and make her feel normal. Because the most frustrating part was for mom to say, I'm not crazy. I know I'm not crazy. She had been saying that for a long time before Charles Bonnet even really revealed itself to her and us. She was dealing with it for years before we even really knew about it. And it wasn't until it became obvious and she started explaining what she was dealing with that we realized this explains why over the last 5 or 6 years, mom keeps saying, I know I'm not crazy. I know I just saw that. We would have no idea what she was talking about.
I'm glad that you guys did what you did because I'm sure she felt so lonely at that time, feeling alone because no one understood what she was going through.
Correct. It's very
Um,
isolating. It's very isolating. Even if you have a bunch of people around you, it's isolating.
And not to mention that, simultaneously she was going blind
Right.
from
Right.
glaucoma. And it was a gradual process. She wore Coke bottle glasses from the time she was a toddler. She always had visual impairment. So mom was always very self-conscious about her ability to see things, and there was nothing they could do to correct her vision. Even the glasses didn't help.
but she was an avid reader, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
For the last
amazing.
20 years of her life, she read with a huge ultra mega sonic magnifier. And this would block out everything else, and this magnifier was right there. How she was navigating holding the paper or whatever she was reading was always, it wasn't comical to watch, but knowing our mom and knowing how she is, there was a little bit of humor to it that would bring levity to some situations. And when she was reading, she wasn't going through anything like that because she was in her favorite place. We grew up watching
Mhm.
mom read a book a day sometimes. She would read a 400 or 500 page history based novel overnight. I'd go to bed, mom reading a book, and wake up with her turning the last page and I'm getting ready to have breakfast and go to school, and she's finishing her book. And relating to your previous question, that may have probably hurt all of us more for her than the Charles Bonnet itself, because what she was deprived of, you know, she could no longer read. And it's interesting because Charles Bonnet syndrome advanced with her, and it started showing her what she was missing, meaning she would see on the ceiling, she would see pages of a book turning, and she would see print or writing appear on the page as if she was writing it. But sometimes it was something she had already read, sometimes it was something she was imagining. But Charles Bonnet was giving her a book on the ceiling. Besides seeing some children every now and then and being reminded of Jersey City every now and then, that was one of the only three good things that happened with Charles Bonnet syndrome with mom.
Okay, so there were some good, but mostly bad
Right. And
or dark.
it was frustrating because it even hurt mom, like when she would tell me about that hallucination or that episode, but that's the one where she would go, I hope that happens again. I can't remember where I left off, and that's the one where she would want to revisit.
It was also awesome because mom was fluent in Latin and Greek. And she was highly intelligent and sometimes and self-taught
Mhm.
those languages. And she would see those messages sometimes in those
Mhm.
languages.
Yeah.
And it was
Wow.
so it we what we're learning about Charles Bonnet syndrome is that it does those hallucinations seem to pull from the memory bank, and even things you don't really remember happening in your life come back. And we had somebody in our support group who was an avid horror movie.
Mm.
She watched horror
Right,
movies all the
right.
time growing up, and it was ingrained in her. She loved them. She loved to get a good scare. Well, guess what happened when she got Charles Bonnet syndrome? All of those images from those horror movies were her hallucinations. And this poor woman suffered at least 3 or 4 falls down the steps, broke almost every bone in her body, or has broken almost every bone in her body. And she suffers tremendously to this day. And it's been 17 years that she's been coping with it. And she was properly diagnosed at Yale University by a doctor, but he had no help for her, no resources, um, one of the things that people in the medical community want to do is they want to prescribe psychotropic drugs for people who have this condition. And right now we're finding that any medication that they've given to an individual, any medication administration, just it isn't working. It isn't helping the Charles Bonnet syndrome. But what it may be doing is, because psychotropic drugs are so powerful, is that it may be doing damage to that area of the brain that there's nothing wrong with. No medication administration is just as bad as incorrect, or none is better than incorrect for sure. But we're finding that it also increases the fall risk for people that have this, because they become very groggy. They were usually giving them medications for, schizophrenia, or even dementia medications, and they make them very groggy. And the only thing that we're finding that seems to help a little bit is Xanax because of the anxiety.
Mhm.
But that was something that we could just personally, we're not medical doctors. We don't offer medical advice in any way, shape, or form. We only know what worked for our mom. But even that little tiny bit of Xanax would make her loopy.
Yeah.
As she lost her vision, she became more dependent upon us physically to get her everywhere.
So that improved the mind, but it was not beneficial for the body.
Well, it would help her sleep
Mhm.
because the other problem that people with Charles Bonnet syndrome experience is sleep deprivation. Because if, especially if they're hallucinating, many people have nothing happen at night and then they hallucinate during the day. Many people are fine all day long, and then the minute the sun goes down, and so many people say, "Oh, it's sundowners." No, it's not. No, 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 it's not. And that's where all of the misinformation and the confusion comes in, and the misdiagnosis. And that's how come people end up in psychiatric wards. They've ended up in assisted living facilities, mental hospitals, prisons. People have hallucinated and committed crimes, and not even remembered because they thought they were defending themselves against something, and then they got locked up because they were considered mentally ill.
Yeah.
This is a really serious situation. And what's so sad, Renee, is that this diagnosis is it was 1760, I believe, is when this diagnosis was actually founded. And it's never been paid attention to.
That far back?
Yes, ma'am, by Charles
Charles
Bonnet.
Bonnet, his
Hmm.
grandfather suffered from this, and then he ended up suffering from it. He had some sort of medical education or training. He applied his knowledge to what he was going through and came up with the fact that it was a syndrome that only he knew to be suffering from himself. So he named it Charles Bonnet syndrome. Related to treatments, medicine, psychotropics, all these things, there are some, I think they're called SSRIs, that
Mhm.
they suppress something that can help. But really, cognitive therapy is something that probably is more productive than anything else.
If it wasn't for Judith Potts, none of this would be happening. We would have never had resources or answers for our mother, or for each other. Judith Potts' mother suffered from this, and she began the same way we did. When her mother was done, she wasn't. And so she was so frustrated in not being able to help. She wanted to help other people. And Dominic Fitch is probably the global research specialist on Charles Bonnet. Unfortunately, he's retired. He came up with a lot of different coping mechanisms. And one of the things they found that seemed to help, ironically, was ginger, either in its natural form, ginger ale, okay, sometimes, but mostly ginger tea, taking the natural part of the ginger, and somehow incorporating it into the food. Isn't that something?
I've actually read in some social media, there's a couple Charles Bonnet groups where the individual had using fresh ginger, that even though whoever the subject was didn't like ginger, was eating it and dealing with it, and it was apparently significantly reducing their hallucinations through the night, specifically as they were sleeping. There's just too much unknown and too much that has to be done. I'd love to know. I know that research can be done to find more natural ways of dealing with this without having to get deep into the pharma world. But at the same time, we would ingratiate the pharma industry recognizing this and working towards it, because it would bring attention to Charles Bonnet syndrome and help standardize treatment for it, even though we don't really want a medicine. But if it will help people, then it should be what it would be. One of the things we
Yeah.
tried to do with our mom was not have prescriptions added on top of each other. When something happened and mom went to the hospital for whatever reason, there was, mom needs to take this, and it was like, do we really, really need that? A lot of mom's problems were because of medicines in the first place. I would love to see a more natural ways of contending with Charles Bonnet syndrome. And I know they're out there. The energy and the time has to be put into them. Mary Carmel's light can hopefully bring enough attention to be the impetus for those things to occur, and for people to,
Yes.
look at it in a treatment way rather than a what is it way, you know.
Yeah, change their thought process. Yeah.
But on this on that same note, pharmaceutical interest, and while we would say we'd love to see more natural methods, anybody living with Charles Bonnet syndrome would say, hey, if there's a pill that can cure it, I'll take it, because we don't know what it's like to live with it. We've only experienced the other side of it. But the pharmaceutical industry getting involved would mean research, and that is so desperately needed about Charles Bonnet, because there are 50 areas of the brain that control vision. We're not even sure which area the Charles Bonnet syndrome is firing from, right? And so that's the conundrum, is that there have been MRIs done on people while they're having a hallucination, and the brain is, there's no abnormality on the MRI. And they're having a hallucination in that while they're having the MRI, and there's no abnormality.
How did the ophthalmologist find it, Kevin? I think that's what you said for your mom.
So mom's ophthalmologist wasn't any help. She had heard of it, but basically her response was always, we just don't know enough about it. It sounds like that's what you're dealing with, but I really don't know. I'm sorry. We can't help you with that, you know? So that leads to where the neuro ophthalmologist that Eva integrated with mom. And so Eva, if you want to.
Well, the unfortunate part is, in between Kevin just begging for information from the ophthalmologist, she was given this diagnosis of dementia by her family practitioner, who absolutely did no assessment on her at all. It was a very lazy diagnosis. She didn't even run an assessment. So when mom came to live with my husband and me, I found this neurologist first, who I took her to him because I wanted to know if he thought she had dementia. And he's a leading neurologist here. And he does not give someone a dementia diagnosis until he's seen them 3 times.
Yeah.
And so we went the first time, and mom failed the first test, but she was nervous. She was also having a hallucination. All this was going on, and I was just desperate for answers. And so I went around the corner and I said, doctor, I said, do you have any idea what might be going on with my mom? He said, no, and I'm not going to know until that third visit. So he said, don't worry about it. Sometimes people are just anxious, which is another reason why he waits,
Yeah.
because sometimes there's so much anxiety. You give somebody a list of words in their 80s. She's just learning how to be blind. She's just left her home of 50 some odd years to come live in a place that she kind of knows, but she's not sure.
Yeah.
She'd rather be home.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. And so when we left that day, she was devastated. And I said, Mom, don't be devastated, because it's not until the third visit. When we came home, she was so laser focused on something that I couldn't figure out. And her mind was definitely working. Her hallucinations were a lot less, because she was laser focused on something. And she wouldn't talk to me about it. And so we were going back the next week to see this doctor, and we went back, and she said, I've got to see him. I got to see him right now. And the nurse said, well, man, you'll have to wait. She goes, no, no, right now. And he's walking through, and he said, Mary, is everything okay? And she went boom, 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 exact order, the words from the week before. She remembered them in chronological order. And he goes, well, she doesn't have dementia. And so
He didn't wait for
when
the third time.
he did, and she was, and when he said that, you could just see this release of, because the one thing my mom was, our mother was not okay with, was thinking that she was crazy or that she was losing her mind. She just would just pride herself on keeping her memory. Her vision was enough, right? And as one of our esteemed group members always says, Duchess Antoinette, she's losing her vision to glaucoma. She says, I'm okay with losing my vision, but I'm not okay with losing my mind.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the mantra of people with Charles Bonnet syndrome. So the dementia diagnosis went away. Mom was relieved, but still we didn't know what was going on. And so this doctor said, I think this is what it is. But he said, I'm not, because I don't feel qualified to give her that diagnosis. But we had already known about it. We already knew what we thought we were dealing with. And he said, I think you're right. I think that's what you're dealing with. But he wasn't comfortable saying that's what it
Yeah.
is. That saved her dignity and her grace and her quality of life,
Yes.
getting that dementia diagnosis expunged.
She's an intelligent lady. Well, let's stop here and let's take a break and hear from our sponsor.
The Soaring Through Adversity podcast is presented by Victory in Time. Victory in Time's mission is to help executives, leaders, and business owners excel in their faith, lives, and work. Through speaking engagements, one-on-one mentoring, and our mastermind groups, known as Victory Circles, Victory in Time wants to help you become the best leader you can be. Find out more at victoryintime.com. Also, don't forget to pick up your copy of the Soaring Through Adversity book, Life Lessons to Lead Triumph and Rise Above. All net proceeds from sales of the Soaring Through Adversity book benefit Victory Advantage.
Well, I'd like to begin by, kind of gathering more information about the Charles Bonnet Syndrome overall. How many people approximately suffer with this adversity?
Based on the research out of the United Kingdom, from the Royal Society of Medicine, Dr. Dominic Fitch, on all the research that they've conducted, they found that 1 out of every 3 individuals that has low vision or has lost their vision after being sighted suffers from Charles Bonnet syndrome.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
So if you take the number right now, the CDC getting data on the visually impaired and legally blind individuals in the United States is a true challenge. The CD says there are 6 million people that are legally blind in the United States. So that number alone, right, puts us at 2.5 million or more that suffer with Charles Bonnet syndrome. However, that number comes from doctors who report, people who take surveys, people who report symptoms. So we're not even talking about the uninsured, the impoverished, or the undocumented individuals, or we're not even talking about the Native American population on reservations. We're talking about the people, what we know that's reported. So there could be millions more people out there with low vision and that are legally blind that are suffering from this.
Well, you're also referencing the actual blind numbers, right? There's projections in the US that I've read that, and I cannot cite, I can go back and find it and cite it for you in the future. But there are projections that in the US, there are between 20 and 35 million people with low vision. And that's what is known. Let's just say that that's the real number, then 1 in 3,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking the numbers immediately go up to potentially 10 to 15 million people who may be dealing with Charles Bonnet syndrome.
Mm.
And it stands to reason that without knowledge of Charles Bonnet and no real action behind it, the next
Right.
best diagnosis for people is dementia or schizophrenia. And it's true, and it's important here also because there's been a lot of this, and there was just something on a Facebook group the other day that referenced somebody's mother who has visions and says that she can hear them too. And it is a fact that Charles Bonnet syndrome is non-tactile and it has no audio component. However, there's a comparable condition for hearing called musical ear. Musical ear is the equivalent of Charles Bonnet syndrome for your ears. If you have hearing loss, the brain will put sounds in your ears for you. Conditions can exist simultaneously. So it's not unlikely that musical ear and Charles Bonnet syndrome are occurring at the same time. And
Yes.
I have musical ear. My musical ear only happens when there's a lot of noise. When I'm surrounded by a lot of noise, I have a lot of musical ear. I hear things that are not occurring. I hear people calling my name. I hear friends' voices that I haven't spoken to in 10 years. Just the other day, I was using a yard tool and a I heard the voice of my deceased mentor from 20 years ago. No, from 30 years ago. He passed away in 2011 or 2012, and I heard his voice. And a big problem is that there are people who may very well have Charles Bonnet syndrome and dementia or schizophrenia. And that's where it gets very murky. When you're on a Facebook group or you're in some kind of
Yes.
forum or something like that, it's really not the place, especially when these aren't cited medical things. That's one reason we're doing what we're doing, so we can hopefully get there. But I don't want to be pointing out to people, and I don't want to be disrespectfully saying that that doesn't exist. You're dealing with something else. I don't want to be that cold hearted. But it can't, it is that way. And it's so
Right.
imperative that doctors, that education and awareness happens in the medical community for this. It's imperative, because if someone is dealing with musical ear and Charles Bonnet syndrome, that almost guarantees them a dementia diagnosis.
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. You've actually taught me something because I have several people in my family that have hearing loss, tremendous hearing
Mhm.
loss, and they've said they hear music or yeah, and I didn't understand it at the time, but now I do. That makes perfectly
Sure.
good sense.
And in the words of Judith Potts, two things can be true at once from Esme's Umbrella. So, two things can be true
Right.
at once, meaning because you have dementia doesn't mean you won't get Charles Bonnet. Because you have schizophrenia doesn't mean you won't get it. Because you have Charles Bonnet doesn't mean you won't get the other. So, the one thing that I want to make sure we don't miss in our discussion is that Charles Bonnet syndrome is not just for 55 and older folks. This is a physiological condition that can affect anybody at any age, any ethnic background, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, gender. It doesn't matter. It is indiscriminate. It doesn't matter. If you have eyes, this can affect you because you lose vision. And the vision loss doesn't just have to be from an eye disease. If you're in a car accident and your
Hmm.
vision is compromised, if you get hit on the head and, or because of eye disease or diabetes or Parkinson's, anything that can affect your vision
Mm.
can bring Charles Bonnet syndrome on. So we have somebody in our group, actually, God bless her. She has Parkinson's and Charles Bonnet syndrome. And she's already struggling physically to get around her home. And she has a really great sense of humor about it, but you can just hear in her voice how helpless she feels sometimes because her environment is always changing because it's a hallucination. So the way people are guided to our support group is that usually they'll call our helpline, or they'll call Dr. Gary Cusick, our fearless leader, also our head cheese. He likes to be called that, and he speaks with everybody before they come on support group because he wants to be sure that he determines that they are at least dealing with Charles Bonnet. And so I get phone calls from parents who have children that have Charles Bonnet. They've been taken to their family physician, they've been taken to psychiatrists. There's no diagnosis, so it's Charles Bonnet syndrome. And I have two stories for you. One is a 13-year-old girl who wants
Oh
to have
no.
schizophrenia because there's a pill for it. She doesn't want Charles Bonnet. She's been bullied, and she's had 3 suicide attempts, and she's 13. And then there's a 12-year-old. His mother felt pretty confidently that he was suffering from Charles Bonnet, and he did succeed at ending his life. One is too many. But we're finding that with the every time I talk to a parent with a person who has Charles Bonnet at a young age, and even those in our support group that knew they had it when they were younger. So we have some people in our support group that have had this their entire lives. And when they were younger, suicide was definitely on their mind because they couldn't get people to understand them or participate in their experience without being considered mentally ill. And they were often put into mental institutions. It's a very sad story because I'm concerned that it's going to be so concentrated on the older population. We're going to miss these young people who need help. There needs to be a call to action to help these young people. So One of the things I started doing after the event we were at, Renee, the Council on Aging, which was a fabulous event held by Novant Health, I started thinking, how can I reach the younger population? So we're going to start looking at school events. East Mech High School is having Exceptional Children's Fair on March 22nd, and we're going to go there because we need to start connecting the dots with children as well, and get them and let them know that somebody cares about them and somebody hears them.
The earlier they're touched, the better off their life is going to be.
Exactly.
You mentioned your group and your hotline. Will you tell the listeners how they can reach that?
Absolutely. So our helpline is area code 704-389-0160, or they can go to our website, marycarmelslight.com, and fill out the contact information form there, or they can email us at marycarmelslight@gmail.com. And we do respond. We try to respond within 24 hours at the latest. You can also go on our Facebook page, our social media, and contact us and messenger us there. Kevin constantly monitors our social media, so it's always brought to my attention when I have to call somebody, or Gary will call
You
for
can
me.
also message us on Instagram or X
Yes,
or TikTok.
That's fantastic. You're getting the word out. You are getting the word out.
yes, thank you.
But there is a case, real quick. Didn't Dominic Fitch in the UK, they had the youngest candidate or the youngest person they found was 2 years old having
Two,
Charles Bonnet
two
syndrome.
years old. Thank you, Kevin. I forgot about
And
2 years old.
so there's no it seems a lot of people get the perception that it only affects older people, but that's just not the case. We had a young man on the support group. We think he's gotten what he needed from support group, and he's kind of doing well, by not going to support group anymore. Theo, I believe his name is.
He actually he gave so much to the group as well, because what was really cathartic for people who were older was knowing it wasn't just for the older people, right? This isn't something that gets locked in your head when you're older. This can happen to younger people too. Not that that helps, like misery loves company is not what I'm saying. It's more of this, it affects anybody. As I said earlier, if you have eyes and your vision is, affected, it can definitely, it can happen to you. And we have to keep remembering that, because that's the part that people seem to miss. And yeah, you just can't miss that.
I am sure watching your mom persevere. And, you were talking about her reading 400 or 500 page books with, bad eyesight. Most of us with good eyesight cannot manage that. And then self taught 2 languages, that is absolutely amazing. And that to me says you guys were really encouraged by her, but also she set that fire in you guys to move this forward. And that is absolutely amazing. And just listening to you guys and talking about the medical industry and the nature path, you guys need somebody that is into this world just like you guys were, to be able to pick up this baton and run with it. And I will pray that that's what happens, because it touched the lives of people like you. And that's what this country needs. You've talked about the UK. The world needs that. The world needs that. And the more you guys work at this, it is just amazing to me. I told someone, yes, we have a foundation, but you guys have something that is grassroots, where if I may say, we've got a lot of work to do. My gosh, you guys
We
do,
will.
but you don't have that attitude. I mean, you have that attitude of it can be done and it will be done no matter how long it takes. And that
It
is
will be.
absolutely amazing. Yeah.
You just said the magic words, "Thy will be
There
Hey,
you
done."
go.
one interesting anecdote. We grew up at Fort Bragg, right? Now known as Fort Liberty. One of the first realizations we had after Mom died, when Eva came to me and said, "We got to do more. I want to start a foundation or a nonprofit for Charles Bonnet syndrome," and I was like, "Of course, that's a great idea." When we started brainstorming that, immediately the VA came to mind. How
Mm.
many soldiers have had their vision lost, damaged, or in the military? and are dealing with what some may define as post-traumatic disorder.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
It's actually Charles Bonnet Syndrome. In the military alone, its own data set,
Yeah.
just military and VA. There's so many potential causes and reach that Charles Bonnet has that, yes, it's a bigger task than we'll ever achieve on our own. But as far as we're concerned, we're going to make it so that everybody has to pay attention. The medical community has to pay attention. And let's be real, there are a lot of conditions out there that are worse. There are lots of things in the world that are worse for people, more deadly, just worse all the way around. But I challenge anybody to go through what we went through and see the pure four-letter word that our mother went through. I challenge anybody to go through that and not know how serious it is. Had we not been there,
Absolutely.
had mom had a different support system, she might have taken herself out.
Thank God she had you guys and the rest of your family, and that you guys had the wherewithal to be able to take care of her and do the research, because most people would have just, or a lot of people would have just have taken the status quo and just kind of, you know.
Let it be, and we see a lot of that in support and with people that we deal with, that there can be family members that aren't so understanding and things don't go the way that they could.
Hmm.
Our family did play the most important role in this because our Aunt Rosemary, one of mom's
Mhm.
closest sisters, in a dozen Google sessions in mom's room while we were taking care of mom. That's how often it happened. Ro would visit half the time she visited mom's having episodes or hallucinations. And so Rose Googling symptoms, asking us and mom, what's going on? Let me try this. Probably 12 different, 15 maybe sessions of that. And she finally came across this thing called Charles Bonnet Syndrome.
Oh my gosh.
Finally.
Yes.
Now if you go Google, now if you Google any of those things, it pops right up. So
Yep.
there is
Yeah.
progress. There is progress being made.
And on that note, Kevin, because it's popping right up, that's how many people are
Right.
looking for help.
True. True.
But I mean, their people don't know what to do. And so they've heard about it, so they're Googling it. And so now it's becoming more prevalent on the search engine. It starts to pop up where before it was like, what are you talking about? And don't forget, at this point, she's already been given the dementia diagnosis. So she's looking for any alternate differential diagnosis that she can
Yes.
find because
That's her sister. She knew she wasn't crazy. She knew it.
Yes. Absolutely.
mom could tell you when I would tuck her in or Kevin would tuck her in at night, she would say, okay, I had this for breakfast. I took my medications at this time. I yelled at you at this time. I
Hmm.
I was unpleasant. I went to the bathroom. People with dementia can't do that and wake up the next morning and remember what they told you the day
Yes.
Absolutely.
before. I mean, not verbatim, not like she
Hmm.
could. And so you ask about how it affected my life. Mom affected my life simply because she was my mother, but I always felt a lot of compassion and empathy for her because of her vision. Because I thought, wow, if mom had full on vision, the things that she would have loved to have been a teacher, and she was. She taught her children, but she would, she wrote for the local newspaper. She wrote children's books. I mean, that we still have to get published. I have so much poetry and so many journal entries. It's incredible how much I have from her, that we have actually from her that I didn't even know. And then I look back and I read it all and I think, Mom, she was just one of the loneliest people on earth. And I think it was because of her vision.
Yes.
Even she was gregarious and she loved life and she would talk to anybody that walked past her on the street. She never knew a stranger. She had the biggest heart. Um, she really did. She would ran a cancer campaign for a young boy that was when Kevin was in school that was diagnosed with cancer, and she got those big water jugs and took him to all the little stores and were in the town we grew up in. And that woman would go pick him up and cart him home and put it through the change machine and give that money to the family so they could survive and unfortunately he didn't make it, God rest his soul, but she did everything she could. But my mother gave me personally, and I mean our mother, but our mother gave me strength I never knew I had, because not too long after she passed away, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I think it was just digging deep and knowing what a survivor my mother always was, and teaching us to never give up, don't ever give up. And I got through it. And every time that we have hit so many roadblocks with this, getting the 501(c)(3) together and developing our board, and there were times when I was just ready to, and I would hear her, don't give up,
Mm.
don't give up. She always called me kiddo. Well, both of us, I think she called both of us, she called everybody kiddo. And I could just hear her, don't give up. So that's what, I'm not sure. I'm sure Kevin has a different perspective of what she instilled in him, but my mother taught me that it was okay to be a strong woman. Being a strong woman is okay. Don't let anybody put you down just because you're female.
I like
She
her.
said,
I like her.
she wasn't, you would have loved her. And she would always say, don't let anybody ever make you feel less important, less intelligent, less beautiful, less than who you are, because you're all those things. And she said, so you just fight. And that's how mom affected my life.
Well, I think this is a good place to close because I would like to say that, yes, she instilled that and you guys so that you could share it and move it forward because you are encouraging me just wholeheartedly with what you've told me about someone that faced the kinds of adversity that your mom faced and so many others out there. It is just
You don't know the
heartwarming.
half of it, sister.
Oh, I know. I'm sure you have so many more stories,
Oh,
and I hope you guys will come back and tell us at a later date, the advances that you and the community has made and the world has made to help with Charles Bonnet syndrome.
we would love that, Renee. I'm sorry I didn't give Kevin a chance to say how
Oh,
mom
that's okay.
affected
She taught me
him.
to read when I was 3 years old. I could read and write already.
Oh my gosh.
That was a big one. So much
Oh,
so
yeah.
that I felt like kindergarten was a waste of time.
So it wasn't just that she is smart, you guys are too. And I think we can all tell
Well,
that.
thank you, but I'll leave that for somebody else to decide.
Okay. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Renee. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Renee.
Thank you for joining us on the Soaring Through Adversity podcast. You can listen and subscribe on our YouTube channel, the Victory Advantage website, or wherever you get your podcast. New episodes are released on the first of each month. To learn more about our foundation, the Victory Advantage, visit thevictoryadvantage.org. There you can find more information, donate, or apply for grants that support individuals with cognitive and physical disabilities to live independently. We are serving the Union County, North Carolina area as well as the greater Charlotte metro area. Thank you for being so supportive, and always remember faith first, not last, will lead to victory in time. And until next time, keep soaring.